Welcome back. A report by the IMF highlights that welfare scheme launched by the Modi government to counter the impact help eradicate extreme poverty. It highlights that inequality has declined under Modi government and extreme poverty was less than 1% in 2020. Joining us is noted economist, former Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India, Arvind Virmani. Sir, thank you for joining us on Times Now. Your paper that you've co-authored with Surjit Bhalla and Karan Bhasin, The Pandemic, Poverty and Inequality Evidence from India, has some very revealing findings. It says that India was able to keep poverty and extreme poverty levels very much in check. Could you tell us, how did you arrive at this conclusion?
So you have to put it into perspective that we are making poverty estimates from 2011-12 right up to 2020-21, and this is done in two parts. One is in the usual way without what we term as in-kind transfers, and that gives a certain poverty line, poverty rate for all these years, including 2019-20 and 2020-21. Then we bring in these transfers of food through the PDS system and do the recalculate the poverty, and then look at both these numbers. So what do these numbers show? Firstly, they show that poverty in 2019 without the food transfers was down to less than 1%, and then and if you compare the 2020 with 29, poverty definitely increased if you don't account for food transfers. There's no doubt about it. The pandemic had a negative effect on the poor, the less well-off, the more well-off, everybody. But what we show is that the increase in food transfers or the in-kind subsidies, because if you remember, the price of food was reduced from the usual rupees 5 per kg, etc., which had been there since 2014-15 when the Food Security Act was passed, to zero for all those covered by the Food Security Act. So this act of reducing the subsidy from the usual one which prevailed from 14 to 19 to zero in 2020-21 onwards,
now, Doctor,
the show was able to completely offset the decline in poverty which would have otherwise occurred.
Right. Dr. Virmani, this is a working paper. The opening page carries a disclaimer. This says the IMF does not necessarily endorse the claims made in the working papers.
So 2 points. I have done two. When I was ED in the IMF, I did 2 working papers. All working papers have that, but they are refereed by people in the IMF. Several people in IMF refereed this paper. Just they had in my 2 papers okay, you know, when I was the ED there. And in this case, the World Bank, a preliminary seminar was also given in the World Bank. So that's a standard thing. It's not the view of the IMF. The view of the IMF in reports. It's never, working papers are never part of the IMF view.
Okay, Dr. Virmani, allow me to ask you this. There will be those who will ask you about the methodology adopted. What would you tell them?
So we have used all the methodology. The paper is completely comprehensive. What World Bank used to do, what Indian government used to do, and whatever is the academic community. We have not used things which are arbitrary and focused only on India. We've used international methodology, which is being used everywhere, and then we make an additional methodology, which is to go into details of the state growths, because if you know, there are poverty levels differ across states. So we added another methodology which went into state-wise detail. Earlier methodologies just use the projection from the overall per capita consumption and changes in that. So all these methodologies are given there. All the results from each of these methodologies is also given in our report. But what we are talking about, and those things are there. It can be seen. All the assumptions are there. Everything is there. But it's an academic paper. It is not it's not a survey or you'll hear of various kinds of surveys which have been done. This is a paper focused on estimation of poverty
Right.
In the absence of a proper expenditure, consumption expenditure survey.
And based on hard numbers. Thank you, Dr. Virmani, for joining us on Times Now and for decoding this working paper that you've co-authored. With that, a short break on Times Now.